Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX, and I'm joined today by the author of this brilliant book, an activist, a treason trialist.
It's one way to describe it.
Just an all-around powerful voice, young voice in South Africa's politics, Rekgotsofetse Chikane.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's going to
Welcome,
be a good day. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be good. As we were saying, part 1 of 61.
Part 1 of 61. Wow. Okay, yeah, let's go with it.
So I guess like Sona is an interesting place to start. Because, well, Sona.
Yeah, no, Sona's weird. Sona's been weird for a while. I remember like watching Sona when much younger, like no one paid attention to Sona at all. And then the last government started back, 2014? And the EFF came in and made everyone aware that Sona won't go according to the same old rules. And everyone got super excited about Sona, of like watching this event. The speech was also interesting, but you're really there and you paid attention because people started acknowledging that, there's something. It was ages ago, right?
About that era.
That era of like, Sona will not happen, right? Unless this person accounts for X, Y, Z, right? Fantastic time. I remember no one used to watch Sona in 2013. And in 2014, you just had entire like food courts at UCT just sitting there waiting to see like what's going to happen next. Right? And that wave kind of like rides on. And then President Cyril Ramaphosa comes in and the idea is like, well, Sona's going to be the same. Do we have the same antagonism towards him as we had with the last president? Are we going to disrupt this as well? And it hasn't been that. So Sona has kind of gone back into we're just going to tell you about the country and what are our plans, which is fine, right? You're going to want a government to do that.
Yeah.
But you also want a government, now that we're paying attention, right? Now we're listening to your plans. Sona has now become this place where you can now fully acknowledge that the government is not doing what they promised. Right, before we got a bit distracted by the fanfare, but now the distractions kind of dissipated, and the idea is the government is saying certain things are going to happen, and the idea is, well, did you achieve them the following year? And
a fairly simple exercise.
Yeah, right? Most democracies kind of function like that. And Sona, for me, in this country, kind of needs to explore that idea to its logical conclusion, right? You can't fall short. You can't come in and be like, cool, we're just going to talk about what's going to happen. And then next year we're going to talk again and no one's going to hold us accountable in between. And it's a quid pro quo, right? Citizens have to be able to watch Sona and say, well, I know you want to tell us about what the budget might look like, all your initiatives or the grand plan now, but can we talk about what happened last year?
Like, I couldn't agree more, firstly. And also, like, last year we had 2.
Yeah.
And we did the exact same thing. It was like, February, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
June, we're going to do this. And it was like 2 different we're going to do's. And there was never like, by the way, we may not have done that.
Yeah.
Here's why.
Yeah.
It was just like, nope, please dream.
Because I remember the first one. So ESCOM is the easy political hot potato, where it came and be like, we need to restructure ESCOM.
Right.
And I remember as soon as he said that, my first thought was like, wow, what a headache you've just created yourself. But let's hold you accountable. 6 months later, after a second Sona, ESCOM discussion wasn't even in the second Sona. It was just kind of trickled about. Right? Maybe we should solve this electricity crisis. ESCOM becomes a huge issue in the back end of last year. The plans are we going to take it apart? And for me, I understand the exercise that taking apart ESCOM is a highly complicated exercise, right? That will take years. I am not asking for you to take apart ESCOM in 9 months after your Sona speech. What I do want is an update of what are the challenges that you're facing. If it is unions, then come out and say, hey, this is the challenge. We're in the middle of negotiations. We have a union issue. If it's not the union issue, if it's just pure logistics, we want to take away distribution out of ESCOM, but we can't find the right partner to then do the distribution of electricity. If it is the issue that municipalities on the ground just don't have the capacity to do that exercise by themselves, which they don't now, if they showcase.
You've already clarified more issues than I feel have been clarified in any Sona. I'm like, that makes,
just tell us.
I don't get this. And like, of course, believe me, we'll go to everyone in this chat. But like, focusing on the president, because he is the president of the country, we both come from ANC families, so we have that whole thing as well. But anyway, sorry, uncles.
Sorry, uncle. Sorry, dad.
Yeah.
Sweeping that under the rug.
Well, I'm in the clear on that front.
Yeah, fair enough.
But like, why is it so hard to admit the mistake, right? Because it's like everyone can see there's a mistake, right? We promised fixing governance we now have rolling blackouts. That's fairly clear, right? It seems like there's this knee-jerk reaction to then run and make a new promise, like there'll be no load shedding for a month, as opposed to like, citizens, let me square with you.
Yeah.
Right? We're in this together. It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Here's how it's going to take 5 years. Here's how things messed up. These are the problems. Bear with us. We might have to load shed for a year.
Yeah.
We apologize for putting you in this position, but this is the only way to get out of it.
Yep.
Then I feel like people are like, that's an interesting Sona. And it accords with my reality. But if it's like, hey, everyone, just close your eyes.
Just close your eyes. Let's just dream a little
and
bit.
And Barry White comes on and is like, listen, citizens.
Yeah, exactly, right. So we had a moment last year where that happened. It was a day, I remember talking to someone being like, this is a weird day. And it was when Tito Mboweni gave his medium-term budget speech, and on the same day, I forget her name, but it is a former board member, or she might be on the board of ESCOM, just happened to be at Parliament, presenting to Parliament on the exact same day. Tito Mboweni comes out and says, life's tough.
Yeah.
And life's going to stay tough in this country unless we make changes. Now, he's one of the only ministers who stands on his soapbox and says, it's hard. Like, the mess that was created over the past, and I hate when people say, you know, the last decade. I always say, well, no, it's more like 15 years, 15, 17 years, because like weird things started happening in the mid-2000s. It wasn't like the Zuma presidency came in and all hell broke loose. It's like from the mid-2000s, something weird started happening.
And also all of you were there.
All of you were there. So I don't understand, which makes it awkward with my dad, where I look at my dad being like, but you were also there. In fact, you were the Secretary of Cabinet at the time, so we must also explain how we got to this mess, right? So Dimpo, when he comes on, he says, it's going to be a mess, it's going to be hard, right? And it was the first time I saw a public official in the new administration really coming out and saying, it's going to be hard to get us out of this. The same day, I really wish I could remember her name, comes to Parliament and says, government is pressuring us.
We'll put it in the notes of the show.
Yeah, please do. Government has come to us and they're pressuring us to keep the lights on. And we could do this. We could do this exercise, but it means we can only keep the lights on for the next year, and then it all falls apart. What is easier is if government went to the citizens and said, listen, there's going to be rolling blackouts in this country for the next 4 years, right? But we need to do that in order to fix the current power plants, to fix the supply chain management of how we get diesel to the emergency systems. We need to fix the problems over the long term. And once we get through these tough 3-4 years, we'll be good to go. Now, the problem that South Africans have, and it's a very valid one, is a lack of trust. But you have given me nothing to believe that over the next 3 years, you'll be able to achieve fixing this public entity called ESCOM. Right? If we had that confidence, we could then be like, cool, we're ready for tough times. But when you come out to citizens, you say, oh, there's going to be tough times, but bear with us, we have a plan. Citizens are coming back and being like, but you've never had a plan. You've never told us what the plan is. And even when you did give us a plan, you didn't keep us updated about the plan. There were no channels, there were no avenues. So this is where Sona, if we just go back around, becomes extremely important. That Sona can't just be for citizens, the government's plan for the year. It has to be, here's what we did last year. This is where we failed completely. And then the last paragraph can be, but here's how we're lifting off of these things. And I know we said we might not talk about it, but we'll see what the president says. Youth unemployment and free education will be a prime example of that.
Definitely.
Of whatever promises that are made around how you alleviate youth unemployment. There will always be a promise. I want to hear, how did the YES program function over the past 2 years? Right? Generally within the field, most people have the opinion that like the YES program isn't successful. Right? The numbers that it produces have missed all the targets that the president said about 2 years ago. The idea of 200,000 jobs every year over 5 years to create 1 million youth jobs. We're never going to hit that target.
And to be fair there, I feel like he gave YES a very difficult task, because he was like, we have this goal and it's all going to be YES. And then I'm sure YES was like, so we are now you.
So when you think about YES's origin, right? YES's origin, if I understand it correctly, actually starts off from a youth program that started off in Sona 8 years ago. And their target was just like 10,000 jobs. But that really was their target, and they missed that target. And then typical government, when they reintroduced it the next time, it was like, cool, we're going to go from 10,000 to 50,000. And everyone's like, and they missed their target again. So targets become this harbinger of death for policy, essentially.
So true.
Right? Just don't give yourself a target because you want to appease, especially if you're a government that is sitting on 60% of the vote. Or
let alone the NDP. Because remember,
2030
is coming, right? And we've got all these huge targets that apparently, and nobody has been like, there is no way we're going to reach any of these targets.
Yeah.
Like, it's premised on 5% growth.
Yeah.
We're going to get like 0.8 if we're lucky
this year. If we're lucky this year.
So surely there needs to, like, a process needs to start, like, here's our 2030 plan.
Yeah.
Here are the targets. There's no way we're going to reach them. Let's have a discussion.
Where do we go now?
Yeah.
Which is why it's like, if I don't have any children, right? But I imagine if I had a child and I set goals for the child like the beginning of the year, like, listen, I want you to get like 80% for maths, 90 for physics. Like, I'm out here. I want you to get the best marks ever. My child comes back with like 40s across the board. I can't sit there and be like, cool, how do we get back to 80?
And then your child comes back and is like, just dream for
just dream for imagine all the work I'm going to do. And then I also be like, let's dream for a second. No, you have an honest conversation to say, cool, we can never get to that mark. But what will be the mark that deems us successful when it comes to academic marks, right, for this year? And we need to have that conversation. When it comes to NDP, we are lost. I love government officials who are like, but according to NDP, and I said, no, don't do that. Don't do that to us, right? We're already a full 10 years away from it. We had 10 years to work on it. And the clearest sign that no one knows whether that government does not want to talk about NDP is that there is absolutely no talk right now that says we need to develop a report of the halfway mark for NDP. There's no such this. That should be an obvious discussion of we're now halfway to 2030. We need to have a report that accounts for how we have done. Now, government will come out and say, well, that's the job of the medium-term strategic framework or budget, whatever it is. But that only started adapting NDP policies back in like 2014, 2015. So even then, it was outdated and it was only tracking at a slow pace. So it's a mess. It's a mess. But we'll see. Maybe we'll dream again in a couple of weeks' time.
So you raised it, so I'm going to touch on it. And this is the question of free education. Obviously, this is something that I think you can speak very powerfully on because you were part of the movement. You know, we joked earlier, but you were like
it was a fun time
on trial for treason at one point. For essentially peaceful activity. Well, not essentially peaceful activities, right? And what a time to be alive, firstly, that moment. It was also a moment that coincided with what you spoke about earlier in Parliament, where Parliament was extremely lit. The student movement was extremely lit. And now, like 5 years later, the free education policy that flowed from that moment is, I think, entering its third year. So it's getting more expensive for government at a time when everything else is imploding. But at the same time, it's a really important win and a policy that government was brought in a way kicking and screaming to. What are your thoughts on the current iteration of free education and what would you look for in a speech as an update to the nation on that policy?
So I would want numbers. I would want the numbers of these are the amount of people who have now, because in this year there will be, I think this is the year where all incoming groupings since the policy was put in like 2017, whatever it was, should be everyone who's in university, because it was rolled in. All first years will get it. And the second year, that next group of first years would get it. And that by this point, you now have a big enough group to come out and say, here's the amount of people who have achieved free education, right? Or how we are achieving free education with them. Right? Because it's still a bit murky and government hasn't fully come out and be like, you'll never, ever, 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 ever have to pay for this at any point. But we'll see how that works out. The bigger problem is the optics. They're going to be faced with the argument of, you see how expensive it is. This is why we should never have done it. Right? And government's response shouldn't be, oh, we never knew how expensive it was. The response should be, we always knew it was going to be an expensive exercise. That was never really the debate. right? The debate wasn't, oh, it's going to become so expensive, it's going to be unwieldy. Yes, we knew that is a possibility. We knew it's going to be an expensive item. You look across the world, everyone knows this. The question is, how many people are benefiting from it? Right? Because the only way you can justify that expense, and this is why you need to have the numbers of how many people are there, how many people are entering the workspace who have benefited from this, what are the type of income brackets that we're expecting them to achieve. So you can do that very easy, the type of degrees that they're studying, the type of marks that they're studying. You can model that out. So you can then have a justification to say, we know the expense is this high, but we expect the returns on investment to be this much.
Absolutely.
And that's what I would want from, and if not the president at Sona, at least the Minister of Higher Education, to come out and say, let's talk less about the expense, not to put it down or like shove it underneath the rug, but to say, we want to have a firm conversation about what the return of investment is. Right? In a educational system in South Africa that is fundamentally defunct, in a system where young people are systematically unemployed across the entire country, whether you're urban or rural. The idea that university has become this gatekeeper, not gatekeeper, the key to get you out of poverty. Not hypothetically, not maybe. If you get a university degree in this country and you're able to get a job, you get the highest returns of income in the world, simply because of how unequal South Africa is. It is the key to get out of unemployment, to get out of poverty, to get your family out of poverty. And the question is, how do you model that ROI? And no one talks about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that discussion needs to shift, so that when you have the discussion of, oh, free education, free education is a policy. Right? It costs this much. This is the amount of people who are on it, and these are the returns that we're expecting, the tangible returns. Because at that point, you can't even talk about the intangible ones, the ones that you can never see. Right? So that's what I would want from Sona, that type of discussion. What I don't want from Sona is, congratulations, you've been doing free education for 3 years. Cool story. Like, I get that. But I don't want to just hear that as an achievement in of itself. You want to hear the department's actively thinking about, what is the plan for this for the next 10 years? How do we fund this over the next 10 years? What are the type of taxing systems that we're going to put in place to fund this? Just so you're open with citizens. There's too many times where policy discussions in South Africa get hidden away from the public eye, almost as if the public is not smart enough to understand what are the dynamics at play. So we shall see. We shall.
And just on that ROI point as well, like, it's also not as if the money is disappearing. It's essentially being transferred into the pockets of actual citizens. You know? So you've got the ROI on the one hand, which is, this is the future investment we think we're putting into the country. But we're also putting this money into the pockets of people who need it right now. And it's essentially a tax break on poor and some middle-class families. And nobody's made that case to actually be like, in this trying economic time, we're giving you this ease and this route through poverty. But all we hear is like, maybe there's free education-ish, and we'll wait for the protest.
We'll wait for... And I elevate that argument just a bit more, and it links back to, like, well, we're talking about Sona, but the budget speech eventually, right? There's a normal social contract in societies, right, that you take care of the old. So the young people will pay taxes that get redistributed to the old, so when you become old and fragile, the country will help you out, right? That's a normal way countries function, though I found out Vietnam doesn't function like that. Not Vietnam, Thailand. I was in Thailand, and in Thailand, no one gets social grants. It's just no one does. And I thought, what a bizarre world. Then in South Africa, our social grant system is quite huge. Right? Now, I have issues with the social grant system, not necessarily that people get social grants, but I really feel like, here's a good policy proposal for Sona. Tell us the amount of people that you've gotten off of social grants. Like, that should be your policy goal, not celebrating that we've increased it, or this is the amount of people that we're taking care of who are vulnerable. That the conversation should be, how many people have you made less vulnerable since last year? And actively gotten them off of the social grant system, right? But one of the biggest ones is the old pension one. I'm going to get back to free education now, right? The old age grant system is one of the biggest ones, because we've got an aging population. Apartheid really screwed over a lot of older people, fundamentally, right? And there's nothing we can do about that but provide them support. But what do you do in a situation where young people are now becoming, if not equally, but more vulnerable than the older people in the country, right? That social contract starts breaking apart. right? Because the social contract is we pay now, we pay our taxes now, so that later on in life, the younger people then help us out just in case anything happens. But when you have an entire generation, right, I like calling them a lost generation, that term of like NEETs, of the amount of young people not employed in education or in terms of training, right? That number is, I don't know if we want to get into the numbers now, but it is a huge, significant portion of young people. SALDRU, which is the South African Labour something research unit at UCT, they finally did a huge report on NEET last year. They said between 19 and 29-year-olds, there's 5.6 million young people who are at home doing nothing, essentially. Right? So the question is, what happens to those people in the next 10 years?
And to add further weight to your argument, the older generation kind of screwed them over as well. It's 100%. Like their fault.
It is their fault.
Like it wasn't an act of nature. Like you messed up the country.
Yep. And it's twofold. It's like you messed up the country because the apartheid system.
Sure.
And then you also messed up the country because after the apartheid system ended, you just didn't take care of young people. You didn't take care of the economy in a manner that employed young people. You fell asleep at the wheel. And I'm very harsh on the older generation, the same way I wish young people become harsh on me when I join the older generation.
We're starting to get to that.
We're getting there. It's a bit, right? But it's the conversation of if the social contract is broken, right? And young people en masse, not a couple 100,000, we're talking about millions of young people en masse who are unable to contribute to the economy, the entire social contract of our country falls apart. Because right now, we can't take care of young people, we can't take care of old people, and all the people squashed in the middle are squabbling around the idea of like, where does our money go? Right? In my mind, the most obvious investment is to say, well, in order to ensure that the economy grows into perpetuity, I need to ensure that the young people in our country are not screwed over. Right? And free education is one of those mechanisms of ensuring that young people have access to education and quality education. And I say quality education, higher education, and it's not that all universities or TVETs are amazing. Right? Some universities are horrible, some TVETs are horrible, some are amazing, some aren't. Right? It's the idea that it's better than basic education. There's nothing, and most people wouldn't argue that the basic education system of the country is completely failed. And because of that, higher education has become a stronger signifier to the labor market about a person's ability than basic education. Now, this is not to say we mustn't fix basic education, but we must now pick a struggle, right? And free education becomes one of the easiest go-to market programs for young people, if that makes sense. And I think stopping that because it's going to cost more money and not having that conversation ROI becomes circular in nature. So if all the people want us to take care of them, invest in us now, so that 10 years from now we have the jobs and the tax base to ensure that when you are older, that everything is fine.
Oh, this Sona is starting to look very interesting.
I hope they discuss half of the things that we've discussed.
Exactly. So look, let's turn our attention away from like immediate policy or political questions and just look at the political landscape, because there seems to be a growing sense that the system itself is incapable of producing something fruitful, that we may get different kinds of configurations. You know, there may be splits here, splits there, but if the same thing keeps being reproduced under a different label, we end up in the same crisis, you know. And so maybe part of the hard work of our generation is going to actually be, how do we rethink this political landscape and execute something that delivers on minimum requirements? I'm not even talking about like, let's have another miracle, just like, can we reach the minimum requirements of a democracy and an economy which doesn't fail everyone?
There's been a death of politics in this country, and I'm not sure when it happened, but I feel like we can all see the death certificate. The idea that politics in South Africa just hasn't evolved at all over the past 20 years. We've had new players. The most prominent new player would be the EFF, for example, right? We've had new players, but it's still same old, same old. It's not a new grouping. It's not a new scheme of thinking. The top big heads of the EFF were still nurtured within the ANC. The DA hasn't fundamentally changed how it looks. And when it attempted and made its small little attempt, it then booted out the leader who was trying to do that, right? There's this idea that we need to return to this equilibrium point of what politics is in the country, that you have the ANC, and then you have the white opposition party, and then the EFF, and it hasn't changed, right? If you had the NP being like, let me not use that example, but if you have the ANC, you have the white opposition party, and then you have the smaller parties that kind of play around. So I don't understand. I got in trouble for saying this last year. I should probably stop saying, but like, I don't understand why the UDM exists anymore. I don't understand why COPE exists anymore. Yet we put them back in, not because there's hundreds of thousands of people who want them. It's just that there's small pockets of the country who gather around 60,000 votes. It was like 66,000 is the last election to give you a seat in parliament, right? We've become completely stagnant. Our opposition leaders have been exactly the same opposition leaders for the past 30 years, minus the EFF, right? And I love the EFF for the work that they do.
Sure.
But I also just see them as a form, and they hate this, a form of the ANC Youth League, except in Red Berets. What the ANC would hope the ANC Youth League became. So, and the ANC treats them like that.
It's really important because, like, I think the media is doing South Africa a huge disservice at failing to critique the EFF in the right way.
Yeah.
So it falls into all these tropes, which then just rile the EFF's base.
Yeah.
But we do have to have a really important conversation about the EFF.
Yeah.
To critique the EFF, to be like, this is the nuance we want to bring to this debate without necessarily having any agenda.
No.
And the EFF can't be off limits just because it gets a bad rap in the mainstream media. You know?
Yeah, it has to become a mature party, but media has to treat it like a mature party. You can't take the tons of low blows that they keep trying to hand out to the EFF, because then it just galvanizes their base.
Yeah.
But once you look at the landscape that way, it becomes very glaring that there's a huge appetite for something different from that. Right? There has to be something different from that. The idea that we now must be stuck with a failing ANC, with an EFF that is interesting, but we don't know where it might go in the future. Can they lead a country? With the DA who prime themselves as we can govern, right? And they showcase like we can govern in the city of Cape Town. We can govern the Western Cape. And then they get given the two biggest metropolitans outside of that little bubble and showcase that they can't govern at all, not in terms of day-to-day governance of just keeping power in a city.
Yeah.
Like until the end, right? Just keeping power and keeping a mayor, like those fault lines.
Try not to fire the mayor you appoint as well.
Like try to do these things, or try and make sure that your members don't vote against your own mayor. Type of
that would
thing.
be great.
That would be nice, and we might get to them later. But the question then becomes: there is a huge appetite, and I really believe amongst young people for something different. Fees must fall, roads must fall. It is not by coincidence that a huge chunk of both those movements across the country, maybe not so at previously disadvantaged universities, were non-partisan and were very vocal about it, that we will not be part. Now, people could wear their colors as much as they wanted, right? But there was a firm group of people who said, we will not subscribe to any particular political party, and we want Fees Must Fall to be known as that, right? Now, my argument, my joke with them is that, oh, but then you just make your own form of party. You just don't put a name on it, right?
Yeah.
But it showcases that there's a desire for something different that can galvanize millions of people across the country, right? So you take that into national politics and you say, well, the majority of people who aren't voting for national elections are young people, not a couple 100,000. What is it, 8 million, 9 million people, whatever it is, right? That's just sitting there being like, we're not participating in this exercise at all. Now, I was trying to find the stat of when they stop becoming young, do they start voting? And what you're starting to see is that that's not the case. That there's no firm evidence that says, like, now that I am 35 years old and I now earn taxes, I now want to vote. They just fall into the group of people who just don't participate in democratic elections, right? Which accounts for why our numbers are decreasing. So the question then becomes, how do you stop that? If the current players are there and they're failing to galvanize these individuals, there must be a gap in the market for something new. Now, I don't know what that new thing looks like. What I do know...
Yeah, the thing about it is that it can't simply be an outgrowth of anything that exists now, because then we simply just have exactly the same problem in a different configuration.
Yeah, it has to be something that... And this is the problem. Right? Politics is money. Right? Where you get the money, where you get the infrastructure to do these things.
But this is a very important problem, because I feel like in large part, the political system is captured across various boards. So this partly explains why nothing new has emerged, which is, if you want to emerge, then you have to play the I need to get captured game.
Yeah.
So
I need a handler of some sort.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to imagine reaching critical mass without becoming captured in some way, you know, or, yeah.
And why I describe it as a death of politics is that South Africa is not necessarily unique in that regard. When you look across the world, young people are begging the political system to give them an alternative, to give them another type of voice, another form of participating. It's just something that is different from the left-right divide. The left-right divide has existed for, what, 600 years? It really hasn't helped us out in anything besides telling us who we're supposed to argue against, right? And whatever new comes out, how I imagine might come out is that you might just poach people. You might just come out and say, I'm going to take the best young people from every party, the ones who haven't been captured yet, and say, let's form something, but none of you can form part of the leadership. In fact, your job is to be advisory, administrative. You know how to run parties, but we don't want you to be the faces of this party or the idea generation function of this party because you've been there, but we want your experience because you're young and you're intelligent and you've been part of the system.
Yeah.
But we will need someone to stand up to say, I represent something new. Because the alternative, if that doesn't happen, is that this group of young people, and remember we talked about how they're NEETs, right? The majority of them are unemployed. This is not young people in urban areas who are super rich being like, oh, I don't want to participate. It is the most disenfranchised individuals in the country. If you leave them disenfranchised for long enough and you do not give them a political outlet, right? And you could tap into populism if you want to, but if you don't give them a political outlet, an alternative, they'll form their own, right? And theirs will not participate in any democratic function, right? They will not participate in any function that they look at and say, well, this democratic process hasn't helped us out over the past 20, 30 years. Why would we participate according to its rules? It's the same logic of fees must fall. Of we're not going to follow the rules of how we used to negotiate, because when we did that, we came to the same outcome, which is detrimental to us. So we're changing the rules. We're not going to negotiate with council as if it is all merry. In fact, we're going to shut down the university. In fact, you must sit down on the floor before you talk to us. Those small tactics are reminiscent across the world. When you look at Hong Kong is a good example of young people saying, no, you know what, you're not listening to us. And the channels that you're saying that are open to us are not actually open to us. So we're going to rewrite the rules of what protest action looks like in Hong Kong, right? And it gets underneath people's skins, right? You find these examples across the world of young people begging for an alternative, and when they don't find it, creating their own alternative. And sometimes it's not good. Sometimes it'll be in the form of protest action. Sometimes it'll be in the form of right-wing groupings. I've been listening to a lot of Jordan Peterson recently.
Oh, my goodness. My deepest condolences.
It's interesting. But his argument that I don't like many of his arguments. One of the arguments of young people are being pushed onto the internet, onto places such as 4chan. These are real individuals who are finding political homes, and within that space become antagonistic to the current status quo.
And get radicalized.
And become radicalized. That is happening online. It is happening in our real lives. And the question then becomes is, if you create this swelling of tension, because that's what I believe it is, when will this game come to an end?
The danger for me as well is that just as there's an appetite for something new and progressive, and of course we can define what that means, but at this point I'll just settle for liking democracy and like more equality.
And not harming people.
Yeah, exactly. And electricity.
Yeah,
but
it would be nice. Maybe we will.
This is a bonus.
Yeah, this is a bonus.
Yeah. I also think that if we don't as a society, and remember, we're not talking here because like next week we're going to be like, hey guys, here's the party.
Yeah, no.
But unless we start having these conversations, then like this whole notion that this system's going to serve us is just not going to work. So like I think one of the key problems and one of the key dangers is if something new isn't built and the hard work isn't done to build it soon, there is also a great gap for a right-wing populist, like what the Fox Newsers for white liberals think the EFF is.
Yeah,
you have no idea how the EFF, like the EFF is not xenophobic, Afrophobic. Where a real populist movement will be like Afrophobic, death penalty, anti-abortion.
Everyone get
out, like and that there's also a gap for that. So it's like something new could emerge that is very dangerous. that gains huge popularity, and we've seen that across the world.
Yeah.
So it's like, which one's going to win first? A new progressive alternative, or this very scary right-wing movement that could just like engulf the country very quickly?
And the interesting about progressive movements is that they still have an attachment to traditional politics, right? It is, we want to fundamentally change the system, but like we will still be guided in one way or another by the current status quo of the system. Right? So I love analogies, or not, I just like examples. Last year's xenophobic attacks and Afrophobia. There was a moment where Mangosuthu Buthelezi went to one of the hostels in eastern Johannesburg to try and quell down violence. He went there and he essentially said, we shouldn't be harming people. This is not what we should do. Right? Now, traditionally, when that man speaks to Zulu communities, everyone listens. That's kind of been the status quo for the longest time. They fundamentally disagreed with him, marched out of that meeting to go run rampage in Johannesburg. Right? It was not necessarily a slight against him, but for me, I look at it as traditional leadership structures are not being observed when you don't listen to people. They look at these structures and say, well, we're not going to listen to you anymore. Right? Because you don't listen to us, we're going to do our own thing. Now, the beauty of having these traditional leaders in one way or another, I don't mean traditional as in traditional Zulu leaders, just a traditional leader within the political fabric of the country, right, to help guide you. That's what's useful. The idea when people talk about, and I love the ANC when they say, oh, this isn't the Ora Tambo, this isn't the party of Ora Tambo. I'm like, yeah, that phrase means that you're being guided by some sort of principles. Right? When that disappears and you no longer have any form of North Star at all, you've got no reference point of where we're going to be going, your energy dissipates into the most extremes, which is where you get the extreme xenophobia. It's where you get the femicides becoming worse than they are right now. It's where you get the idea of we can just exclude people because we have been excluded ourselves. And those are real emotions. They're real feelings that people have. And I don't like when people diminish like, oh, it's real feeling. It's also a real intellectual exercise that people are participating in, which is if we don't get included in the system and there's no avenue for us to be included, and we've been actively excluded, then all we know is that the system's supposed to exclude people. And therefore, we will go about and exclude people and make sure that people who look like us, believe like us, act like us, come together. Now, because South Africa is a rainbow nation, I love that phrase, because we're this rainbow nation, imagine all these different aspects of the rainbow going into all their respective corners and the chaos you would have. And that's, for me, the biggest danger. And once you don't think about where this alternative comes in and you get stuck into the rigmarole of the current status quo, you miss that. You miss the 20 million people who just didn't participate in the last elections, either because they weren't registered or they just weren't interested in going to the voting poll, because even though they were registered, they don't disappear, they don't go anywhere. But if you don't listen to them, bad things, I think, start happening.
Well, that's all we have time for.
That's perfectly fine.
In part 1 of 50.
Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry. I'll be here every single time.
Do you know how hard it was to get this guy in SMWX? It was like in 2019, it was the hustle of my life.
It was a problem. But I'm here.
And
January.
Now people see why I tried.
Fair enough.
No, thanks for a really insightful conversation. Down in the description below, you'll be able to follow more about what's happening with Rekgotsofetse, and make sure you get the book.
Oh, yeah.
Breaking a Rainbow. Building a Nation. And bro, thanks so much for coming through.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Ayeye. Thanks for watching the content. Like, share and subscribe on all platforms. smwx.co.za to join the WhatsApp channel. And let's build a new conversation for a new generation. Ayeye.